Open wide.
Last summer, the EPA banned mercury from indoor latex paint because of mercury vapor. The vapor level in this patient's mouth after chewing for 10 minutes is 92 times higher than the mercury vapor level in a newly painted room, 3 times higher than the U.S. government allows in the workplace. This is the kind of story we approach with some caution. The question is there poison in your mouth? The American Dental Association says there isn't, but some of its members say there is and have stopped using it. It is a filling, a silver amalgam filling, the dentist's filling of choice for more than a century. More than 100 million of them were put into American mouths last year. What you probably don't know is that these so-called silver fillings are 50% mercury, and mercury is more poisonous than lead or even arsenic. Because it's been around so long and because it was assumed that the mercury was made stable when mixed with other metals, amalgam fillings were never tested for safety, one of those remedies that the Food and Drug Administration automatically approved. But now a growing number of scientists, doctors, and dentists are saying silver amalgams should be banned.
Open wide.
Last summer, the EPA banned mercury from indoor latex paint because of mercury vapor. The vapor level in this patient's mouth after chewing for 10 minutes is 92 times higher than the mercury vapor level in a newly painted room, 3 times higher than the U.S. government allows in the workplace. This is a silver amalgam filling. It is made of silver, copper, tin, and zinc, and mercury. Half of it is mercury. No specific disease has yet been directly linked to mercury from fillings, but now a number of medical schools are looking at the relationship between mercury vapor in the mouth and a whole variety of diseases. Alzheimer's, arthritis, and colitis have all been linked to mercury poisoning. Mercury in the workplace has produced kidney damage, brain damage, birth defects, and symptoms of multiple sclerosis.
There is no safe threshold for mercury exposure. None. And there isn't someone somewhere who may not have a very violent reaction even to the lowest amounts of mercury.
Dr. Murray Vimy is a scientific consultant to the World Health Organization's Committee on Mercury in the Environment. He's a researcher at the University of Calgary Medical School, and he's a dentist. He got rid of mercury in his own practice 8 years ago when he learned that mercury vapor routinely escapes from amalgam fillings.
When I measured mercury coming off of fillings, that was reasonable doubt in my mind. There was enough reasonable doubt that I made a clinical decision for my patients to stop using it.
You will get some mercury vapor. There's no doubt about that.
Dr. Heber Simmons speaks for the American Dental Association. Even though more and more American dentists have serious doubts about amalgam, the ADA, which sets standards and approves products, says it is perfectly safe. Up until 7 years ago, the ADA said no vapor at all was released from fillings.
But the amounts that we're seeing are far below any level that could cause a problem. And the levels that we're seeing are simply not clinically significant.
So you concede that there is a constant release of mercury vapor?
We don't dispute that at all. But the amount that is being released when you chew is such of a small amount and a minuscule amount that it is not going to cause a problem.
This issue is chronic exposure, low dose, to a heavy metal. And our laboratory is the entire human population in the Western world who's had amalgams. And no one has ever really looked at that aspect of mercury exposure. A great deal is known about acute exposures, 1 time, 2 time, large exposures. But this is something that people have day after day after day. And we're just at the beginning of that trail of investigations.
Dr. Vimy took a mercury test of the mercury vapor in my mouth, and at that point it was the highest of anybody he'd tested. I had 10 teeth with massive mercury fillings in them. And as he said at the time, if I was a building, I would have been condemned. The reading was so high.
Faye Doris and her husband are patients of Dr. Vimy. She was crippled by arthritis, suffered from fatigue, colitis, and memory loss. Her doctor told her back in 1985, at the age of 35, that within 6 months she'd be confined to a wheelchair. After reading about a connection between mercury and arthritis, Dave Doris talked to Dr. Vimy about removing his wife's fillings.
And I said, go ahead and do it. What have we got to lose? The prognosis is she's going to be in a wheelchair by Christmas for the rest of her life, which was scary for me.
I was mercury-free, I think, by the 21st of August of that year. And within 3 weeks later, I didn't have to use a cane, and all my symptoms started going away. I had more energy. My tremor stopped in my hands. I could do things again. It was just marvelous.
And noticeably, the swelling on the joints of her hands started to go down. But the biggest thing was it wasn't painful on her feet to walk.
And have any of those symptoms returned?
On the whole, I'd say 95% of it is gone away.
That's clinical evidence. That's not scientific evidence. But clinical evidence is where science has to start. Science starts with observation.
The kind of evidence Dr. Vimy is talking about is what scientists call anecdotal, reports of recoveries that have not been monitored under strict laboratory conditions. There are thousands of anecdotal stories all over Europe and the United States. This group in Illinois reported relief from symptoms of manic depression, chronic fatigue, and migraine headaches, from multiple sclerosis and anemia. Last May, Nancy Yost from San Jose was told by her doctors that she had multiple sclerosis. It was confirmed by magnetic resonance imaging, an MRI scan. Incurable. She'd worked in the dental industry and heard reports that some patients showed improvement after having amalgam fillings removed.
And I was cautioned by the doctors always, you've got your hopes too high. Get real here. If you are better, it's going to be a long period.
As a last resort, she had her 5 amalgam fillings taken out. She left the dentist's office using a cane and leaning heavily on the arm of a friend.
The next morning, when I presented to my physician, I threw my cane at him and said, look.
It was that quick?
It was that quick.
What did your doctor say?
Well, he was incredulous. He knew it would be of benefit, but no one expected it would be instantaneous or so dramatic. My voice came back. My ability to walk and hold a pencil came back. It was there. That night I ended up going to dinner in San Francisco and actually dancing 2 dances. And I hadn't been walking since May.
Next day.
Friday evening, the next day.
Are there any lingering effects?
Yes, yes. There are lingering effects if I get overtired or cold or under a great deal of stress.
The National Multiple Sclerosis Society states that this is a cruel hoax on these people to take the fillings out in hopes it's going to cure the MS. And it does not happen in those cases. It simply does not happen.
I think it's a rather strange position to take because according to all the doctors I talked to, they said multiple sclerosis has no known cause and there is no known cure. Well, if we don't know what causes it, why not look at possibilities? Might it be mercury poisoning? They have no better answer.
There's no suggestion that all MS patients will recover if their fillings are removed, but there are enough recoveries or partial recoveries to raise questions. There are alternatives to amalgams, composites like Dr. Vimy's placing in this patient's mouth, porcelain and gold. They're all more expensive than amalgam and, except for gold, not as durable. Amalgams are also easier for dentists to use. While the ADA publicly advocates the safety of amalgam, it cautions dentists to use a no-touch technique when handling the material and to store the scrap, the leftovers that have not gone into a patient's mouth, under liquid in a tightly closed container.
If it's so volatile, so dangerous in a dentist's hands, how on earth can it be safe in our mouths?
Only you got to understand how amalgam really works. If it's in a free form, the mercury that is in the amalgam is dangerous. But when it forms with the copper, the tin, the zinc, and the silver that make up the amalgam filling, it becomes a stable compound at that time. Once it is mixed and placed in a patient's mouth, it is a stable compound and it does not constitute a risk.
Once it hardens,
Correct.
it's safe.
Right.
What do you do with your scrap amalgam?
What we do in our own practice is we keep it in a jar that has glycerin in the jar. We pour the scrap in there and put a top on it. So it is not exposed in any way. It's in an airtight jar all the time.
Why? Given that
That is the recommended way of taking care of it in a dental office. That is what's been recommended by the scientists. So that's the way we do it.
But if it's so perfectly safe in this combined state,
But Marley, you got to understand, when we're saving this stuff, we've got a big jar of it. You got to realize I'm in that office 5 days a week with this material. I do not want to go in there with an open container like that. I want to be as safe as I can.
The ADA is adamant that mercury in a patient's mouth is safe. So adamant that in 1986 it changed its code of ethics. It became a violation of that code for any dentist to recommend the removal of amalgam because of mercury. Almost immediately, Dr. Joel Berger, a visible and vocal anti-amalgam dentist, was charged with fraud by the New York State dental authorities. The ADA provided an expert witness to testify against him. His license was revoked.
I never told a patient that they would get healthier or better. I told them that we could remove a known risk, a poison, a toxin, a carcinogen from their bodies if they eliminate the source of mercury from their mouths. It was their risk decision to do it or not to do it.
Dr. Joel Berger should never have lost his dental license. He was a very conservative dentist. You couldn't even consider him a fringe dentist.
Dr. Vimy testified as a scientific expert for Joel Berger. He says the change in the code of ethics has had a profound effect.
The effect has been that it's really, in the United States, taken away the constitutional rights of dentists and the rights of patients. They no longer have freedom of choice, and they no longer have freedom of expression. A dentist can no longer say that he is against dental amalgam, so it's a fear tactic, it's a witch hunt.
But I can tell you that we are not on a witch hunt, that I personally am not. That's a personal choice that the dentist has to make.
why did you change the code of ethics regarding amalgams?
Because it has not been proven that taking amalgams out will help any of these conditions. And there were people that were taking amalgams out saying that that was going to help MS and other conditions. It has never been scientifically proven that this will happen.
What's the position of the Canadian Dental Association?
Exactly the same. The Americans sneeze, the Canadians bring the Kleenex. So they have changed their code of ethics too.
How do you account for those people who have, whose health has improved after the removal of amalgam fillings?
I would have to say that it was anecdotal. I'm delighted that the people are better.
The word anecdote doesn't mean it's not true. It means it's an observed clinical observation by a clinician, and that's my job. I'm a clinician, and I saw the patient got better. What am I supposed to do, report that he didn't get better?
Dr. Alfred Zam is an allergist and dermatologist in Kingston, New York. He's reported that hundreds of his patients have recovered from a variety of diseases after having fillings removed. He's in the process of filing those cases with the Food and Drug Administration. One case, a 32-year-old woman who was crippled by arthritis.
And I had it seen by a board-certified rheumatologist who's really a good physician. He really knows what he's doing. And he said, there's a limit to what I could do, and he gave her some anti-inflammatory drugs and aspirin and so forth.
Dr. Zam arranged for her fillings to be removed. Within a month, she was no longer on crutches.
The rheumatologist was astounded. Not only was her arthritis better, but you could see she looked like a different person. She was healthy. She no longer was poisoned.
Do you totally dismiss the anecdotal evidence?
No, I do not totally dismiss it. But I just say on the basis of the facts that we have today, they're insignificant. They're clinically insignificant.
How would they know that? Do they examine the patient 3 or 6 months later? How many dentists have done a rectal on you just to be ridiculous?
Today, they're insignificant. They're clinically insignificant.
How would they know that? Do they examine the patient 3 or 6 months later? How many dentists have done a rectal on you just to be ridiculous? They don't know anything about you.
You got to remember, we're looking at really a long time use. You know, there have only been 50 cases reported in the literature of amalgam allergy, of true allergy to amalgam, in the last 85 years.
That's an obfuscating statement. They use the word allergic. It's not allergy. It's poisoning of critical immune processes. If someone dies of cancer, you ask the specialist, why do these have cancers? I don't know. And someone dies of heart disease. Why did this one get heart disease and the other one didn't? I don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. But I do know that it's not safe to put something in somebody's mouth that has a question.
Dr. Zam has charted symptoms of diseases, patients who've had fillings removed, and the results. He points to Joe Savesky as a prime example. For years, he suffered with allergies to certain foods. Then 5 years ago, he began getting serious infections. It went on for 4 years.
I sent him to a board-certified internist who was a specialist in blood disease who could find nothing.
Finally, Dr. Zam had Joe's fillings removed. Within a month, the infections were gone.
His unexplained rashes of 20 years have disappeared. Now he can eat foods he couldn't eat before. His immune system is working again.
Nothing wrong with his blood.
Board-certified specialist could not find a thing.
No other change in his environment that could account for this.
Zero. No change whatsoever. We're just arguing here, or discussing whether a poison is a poison. It's a bizarre conversation, you know, when you think about it, to try to justify if a poison is a poison.
If the mercury in amalgam fillings is as poisonous as you say it is, why hasn't the medical community jumped on it and banned it?
Goodman and Gilman is the Bible of pharmacology. When you go to medical school, you use Goodman and Gilman.
According to Goodman and Gilman, there have been epidemics of mercury poisoning that were misdiagnosed for years. The reason for the tragic delays, says this textbook, include vagueness of early clinical signs and the medical profession's unfamiliarity with the disease.
It says clearly, doctors very rarely make a diagnosis of mercury poisoning because of the difficultness of it. It comes in different phases. One has headaches, one has tiredness, one has this, one has that. It's a very difficult diagnosis to make, especially when it's micromercurialism, very small amounts. That's why you don't have a lot of doctors jumping in, but they will.
The first full-scale investigation into the effects of amalgam on general health is taking place in Calgary. Dr. Vimy and Dr. Fritz Lorscheider, the chief of physiology at the medical school, and a team of other scientists began with sheep. They found that mercury from the fillings traveled throughout the body, and in pregnant sheep into the fetus. The ADA says the sheep studies are seriously flawed. The World Health Organization says the results are valid, and so do a number of scientific journals. But the research that was most compelling was presented to the American Physiological Society in Orlando last October. It showed that on average, all 6 sheep used in the experiment lost half their kidney function within 30 days of receiving fillings. When they moved on to monkeys, a much closer relative of man, Vimy and Lorscheider found the same concentrations of mercury had occurred. They also found that the mercury had a bacteriological effect on monkeys. It attacked their immune system. The kidney and bacteriological studies are now being reviewed by the scientific community. In all the experiments, Dr. Vimy used the same amalgam used in dentist offices. The amount was determined by the animal's body weight. The preliminary results of human experiments show no radical differences between humans and animals. Doctors Vimy and Lorscheider have joined a growing number of dentists, doctors, and scientists calling for a total ban on amalgam. In this country, a ban would have to be imposed by the Food and Drug Administration. So what about the FDA? What does it have to say about silver fillings? Well, it refuses to be interviewed. Surprising, given the widespread use of the product and the confidence that Americans, indeed most of the world, has in both its caution and its expertise. The FDA did send us a brief statement. It says, the Canadian sheep study raises some preliminary questions about the safety of dental amalgams, but leaves important questions unanswered. The FDA remains confident in the value of amalgams in dental care. It says it could ban them, but it won't do that until it is satisfied there is a health risk. Why has the FDA been so slow?
Well, that's interesting because what you see when you look into the FDA, you see that the FDA's dental division has been platooned full of American Dental Association people. The entire committee is made up of people from dental institutions, practicing dentists, and people from the dental industry who make the dental materials. There's virtually no medical input or basic science input from medicine on that committee. And so anything the ADA wants, they pretty much can get through the FDA. That's what's called effective lobbying.
The dental trade industry, the American Dental Association, and the dentists of this country, their primary interest is doing what is best for that patient and to make sure it is safe and effective and it does the job at hand. You got to remember, Morley, I work with this material every single day. I still place it in patients' teeth. I'm a pediatric dentist in Jackson, Mississippi.
Do you have any scientific evidence that it is safe?
Absolutely. There are numerous studies that have been done.
But the ADA's top scientist who was present at the interview says the effects of mercury vapor on health have not yet been well researched. There is barely a scientist who would disagree. Louise Herbeck was disabled and in acute pain for 9 years. Her doctor had diagnosed multiple sclerosis. She had her fillings removed after seeing a report on amalgam on the CBS Evening News. Within 6 months, almost all her symptoms were gone. Her doctor says the most likely explanation was spontaneous remission.
I wasn't just sitting here and one day, oh, suddenly it was all gone. I did something specific that made it happen, and that is by removing the mercury from my teeth.
Louise has become an activist on the amalgam issue. She wants the law changed.
I think dentists should be made to tell the people what they're putting in our mouth. If you get a prescription drug now from a doctor, you have the right to know what that drug is and what its side effects are.
That right to know is called informed consent. But the ADA is fighting it, urging state dental associations to fight any legislation to make dentists explain the possible risks.
If there's no risk involved, why do you have to have informed consent? We do not mind talking about it at all. We're delighted to talk about it. We're fully...
But don't volunteer it. It's what you're telling your people.
Oh, no, I'm not volunteering. I mean, I'm not saying that. I did not say that at all. You're putting words in my mouth now.
You tell people about this controversy about amalgam?
If they ask, I will tell them. I do not go out and volunteer it. Absolutely right. Because in my opinion, there is no risk involved with it.
What I don't understand, though, is why you're so tough on dentists who might say, you know, I'm not comfortable with this mercury stuff. You cut them off at the knees if he even suggests it.
No, we don't. We just say that it's not backed up by sound scientific evidence.
And you regard it as unethical behavior.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's called cutting them off at the knees.
No, not in my terminology, it's not. You may think it is, but it's not.
You spread the word
Marley,
that your local dentist is unethical. How many people are going to go to him?
I can't answer that question. I have no answer for that.
But you know the answer.
But I can say this. I look upon it as us trying to uphold the scientific standards on which this profession is based.
If you took amalgam off the market tomorrow, a good 40% of the American dentists who belong to the American Dental Associations would have to be retrained. Because in their practices, the prime thing that they use is dental amalgam.
As consumers, well, we have to protect ourselves. We can't wait until the last I is dotted and the last T is crossed. The evidence is here. And we should say, if it's not reasonably safe, if there's a question, I'm not going to put it in my child's mouth.
So what are you saying to the rest of us? Go out and have your fillings removed? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not everyone involved in the call for a ban on amalgam feels Dr. Zam's sense of urgency. Dentists who've stopped using amalgam suggest careful consultation before having any fillings removed. Some of them, still members of the American Dental Association, have filed a class action suit against their own organization, charging it has fraudulently misrepresented the amalgam issue to its members. It's been suggested that if the ADA did concede there were risks, dentists might be sued by their patients. The FDA will review the safety of amalgam fillings in March. Just last month in Sweden, the government passed a law allowing its citizens to have amalgam fillings removed under the National Dental Plan. And in Germany, legislation to ban amalgam has been introduced. A total ban is expected within the year.